I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream pretty much lets you know what kind of story it is from the very start. By which I mean when you read the title. Not safe for kids, something horrible, scary, terrifying, squicky. Just keep it away from the youngins. Harlan Ellison wrote this story back in the March of 1967, and it was only 10 pages, and he claims to have written the whole thing in a single night. The inspiration was drawn from a simple photograph, which I will now show here. Get it? Get it? Yeah, okay, let's move on. The story takes place in what would be estimated to be sometime in the 2070s. And now for some backstory, and I know this may sound very generic, but bear with me. Basically, the Cold War erupted into World War III, which was fought mainly between the United States, Russia, and China. These three superpowers decided to build a supercomputer to fight the war for them, essentially making the war fought between three different supercomputers. The computers were called AM, short for Allied Master Computer. Unfortunately, one day, the three computers combined together into one supercomputer and immediately began to think of ways to eradicate the entire human race. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking of that other movie or that other book that did this. You know, that one? Yeah, that one. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, okay. You know what I'm talking about. We can keep moving. But here's where things get interesting. AM succeeds far beyond what any other fictional supercomputer was able to do. In fact, we pick up our story roughly 109 years after AM decided to eliminate all humans. And there are only 5 left. Basically, AM was able to pretty much immediately eliminate every human on Earth that he wanted to. Or perhaps we should say it. And these 5 characters aren't alive through their own survival skills. AM has kept them alive for the past 109 years. And we get to the meat of the story. He keeps these 5 people alive solely so he can eternally torture them for his own amusement. The surface of the Earth has been hit by so many nuclear attacks, nothing could possibly live up there. So the story takes place in a seemingly endless underground cavern, where our 5 remaining characters live together, if you can call what they do living. For the purposes of this story, AM is basically God. He can do anything he wants, far beyond the bounds of what we would think of as a computer. It's just far too powerful. It has full control over basically every single moment of the 5 characters' lives. And if you don't believe me, check this one out. Thanks to AM, the 5 characters are immortal and will never age. He also prevents them from committing suicide or escaping. On a regular basis, he torments them with the type of tortures that would just make your stomach turn, and many of which are not even discussed within the text and are merely inferred based off what you do see. Now, there are only 10 pages, so there's only so much time you can spend on the specific characters, but here's a quick rundown. Ted is our narrator, and we really don't learn a lot about Ted other than that he's the youngest of the 5. There's also Ellen, the only female of the group. Gorister, the suicidal loner who doesn't seem to care much about anything. Benny, previously a handsome homosexual scientist who has been largely transformed into an ape-like creature with a simpleton mind. And finally you have Nimdok, once a Nazi scientist who did terrible experiments on the Jews. These 5 have been spending pretty much every second of every day with each other for the past 109 years, never aging, and always in torment. And I don't mean torture in its most basic sense. AM attacks them in many ways: physically, mentally, and psychologically. They are not trapped in cages and subject to electroshock. Nothing so simple as that. No, as I'll go into a little later, AM spends much more time thinking up cruel punishments for these 5. Our story starts when Nimdoc suddenly gets the idea that there might be a pile of canned food in a cave. So the 5 decide to set out in hopes of finding this food, as the food that AM supplies them with is both scarce and very, very disgusting. You get the sense that this whole thing is just a game to AM, and he's ultimately leading them on a wild goose chase. And the characters are well aware this may be the case, but they're too hungry to be picky right now. On the way, we see but a taste of what AM subjects these humans to on presumably a daily basis. The food they are provided with is disgusting and barely edible, arguably inedible. Foul, disgusting, unbeatable monsters are sent at them, which constantly sends them running in the opposite direction that they wish to go. Storm force winds and mighty earthquakes are kicked up out of nowhere, all in an effort to frustrate them, but never quite kill them. As a brief example of the control AM has over the characters, at one point, Benny, in his simpleton-like state of mind, tries to escape the underground and actually make his way up to the radiated surface. AM punishes Benny by blinding him, presumably forever, as his eyes are described to now be a jelly-like thing. For a long period of time that is described as quite possibly months, the group is separated thanks to a storm-force tornado that never stops kicking them around. During this period, the narrator, Ted, experiences a sort of internal monologue with AM, a rare occasion where AM actually speaks to one of the humans. It is during this talk that we come to understand why AM hates humans. He gives a creepy and iconic paragraph explaining exactly how much he hates humankind. I'll read it here. Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since you began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nano-angstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1,000,000,000th of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant for you. Hate. Hate. You see, AM was created by humans, and there are certain bounds of logic to what he can do. So, although he is very much godlike in this story and will probably be around for all eternity, he is eternally frustrated by the fact that he can never do some things that humans can do. He blames the humans for this, which is why he takes out his vengeance on these 5 characters every day until the universe breaks down. Starting to feel bad for him yet? Anyway, our 5 characters do eventually get to the stockpile of canned goods, but AM only laughs at them as they find out that they don't have a can opener and can't actually get to the food inside. At this point, Benny loses his mind and tries to eat Nimdoc's face off, which gives Ted an idea. For years, the machine had prevented them from committing suicide, but now that he watched Benny try to eat Nimdoc's face, he realized that the computer wasn't accounting for when they hurt each other. And so, we have a bloody finish. Ted kills Benny and then kills Nimdoc. Ellen takes a hint and kills Gorister. And in that final split second before the computer realizes what happens, Ted kills Ellen. Naturally, AM is furious, but even with all his powers, he cannot bring people back from the dead. Having lost all but one of his precious playthings, naturally AM decides to protect the final human being. And how he does it is far worse than anything he had done previously. Truly, his hate of all humanity was only a shadow of what it has become now. Ted is transformed into a being that cannot be described as human. It is much more like a slug, as it leaves a trail of slime whenever it moves. It has no eyes, only two milky white bulbs where its eyes would be, although it does describe itself as able to see. Its arms and legs are rather shapeless and may not even be considered arms or legs at all. But the important thing here is he's completely incapable of hurting himself. On top of this, Ted loses all sense of time. For all he knows, when he feels as if 5 minutes have passed, in actuality 5 years have passed, and quite possibly vice versa. And he knows that this will probably go on until the universe itself breaks down. And yet he still feels like he scored a victory over Am for ridding the world of his other 4 playthings. And yet still, what an awful, disgusting fate for somebody who thinks that they won. Think about that for a moment. The story concludes with Ted discovering that he really needs to scream, but he has no mouth. Analysis coming later.